Today on Renewal Cast, John Goodell and I get together and we discuss the subject of COVID-19 and the church, and specifically the importance of the question, what is the church in the midst of this pandemic? We think it's an important question. We think it's a question that all of us really need to be thinking about and taking seriously during this time, especially as we start thinking about gathering back together and what that looks like and what it looked like as far as us worshiping at home and how that relates to the church. And you might not agree with everything that we say, and that's fine. We want this conversation to get you thinking about some of the important questions about the church and what it means to be a member of a church and be part of that community. So we hope you enjoy this discussion today. And as always, if you have thoughts or comments for us, feel free to leave those in the comments on social media. You can always find us on renewalcast.com. Send us a message through there. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to interact with you as well. So enjoy the episode today. Well, good to see you, John.
Hi, Colt. How are you today?
We're on.
We're on.
Good. Yeah, I think our internet connection might be a little bit unstable, so hoping people can hear us and make sense of this, or otherwise maybe we'll have to have this discussion again. But just, I guess, if there's things that people want us to talk about a little bit more, or they didn't hear and want some clarification today, put those things in the comments and we'll kind of come back to them. But we're gonna take just a few minutes today and talk about COVID-19 and the relationship between that and the church and some of the things that the church has been going through. Of course, we don't have all of the answers, and I'll speak for myself, but I think that some of the things that we say today, we're not trying to slap other pastors or churches on the hand and say you're doing this wrong, but we're just kind of coming at this from what we understand the Bible to say and say to us as we're trying to navigate through some of this difficult time. And we pretty much understand that these are difficult times, and the decisions that are made are very difficult. We, in our community, the ordinance that was passed, kind of prohibiting some of the businesses from doing some things, was repealed just recently, and there was an article in the paper today about how, yes, I realized that was a difficult thing to do, to repeal that, but maybe that was too soon, and I think there's just different people all over the map on this. But I saw a meme. It's been passed around on Facebook. You've probably seen it. Has God and the devil kind of standing there talking to one another, and the devil says to God, I got church canceled. I canceled church. There's no more church going on in the world. And God looks at the devil and says, yeah, but I opened one in every home. That meme kind of, no offense to anybody that's passing that thing around, but it kind of made me cringe a little bit as the church is navigating the COVID-19 pandemic, and the church is kind of coming and asking some of these fundamental questions about church and what it means to do church when you're providentially can't meet. So I guess, John, what do you think is that am I wrong on that? Is that meme a little bit, is it dangerous?
Yeah, I think that idea that a church now has been open in every home because on Sunday people are worshiping together with a family. Now that there's a church in their house, I think that is it's unbiblical. And I think it's dangerous anytime we would deviate from Scripture. you and I believe in something called the regulative principle, and means we get our faith from the Bible and our practice for our faith and what we believe from the Bible. And that just tears apart what it means to even be a church. So maybe we ought to start with, what is the church? If you just to walk through this, I would define the church as the Greek word comes from ecclesia, two words together, called out ones, and has the idea of it was actually a Greek word that the church borrowed from the Gentile culture, in which they would come out of their houses and come together like in a community to assemble and then come to decisions and do business. So the idea within the word church itself is the idea of assembling. You can't have a church without assembling. And then the reason why I would say it's not in your home, just with you and your family, is a church historically and biblically has been a group, an assembly of baptized believers who come together regularly under the preaching of the Word of God to practice the ordinances, baptism, the Lord's Supper, and to practice church discipline. And these mark off the church. They're the keys to the church. And a church has elders and deacons, and there's prescriptions for the church in the Bible. And so just to say that we can't meet no longer with our local church, now we're going to have a church in our home, I think is just to cross biblical lines. You agree? Or
Yeah, I do. I'm thinking about like the home church movement, where I think there's some times where you can take and you could have a church in your home.
Yeah.
I think in the Bible, I mean, they had churches. That's where they gathered together, and you had these different believers. You come and gather together in homes. You do that, and I think you can. And just like now, different churches look different on how they're organized and governed and things like that. I think you can be the true church and look different from the one down the street. But I'm just thinking about, and we'll get into this in a minute, but where the Lord's Supper is instituted, and Paul talking about that in 1 Corinthians, I think like 5 times there, he talks about how when you come together, when you meet, when it's just over and over and over. He's just this understanding that meeting together and gathering, when you come together, is the church. I think you're right. There's this element of coming together that doesn't happen when everybody is on their in their home on the internet. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't be doing anything? That we shouldn't be worshiping? I mean, is what we're doing okay now? I guess we do a live stream service on Sunday morning. We try to keep it kind of like our Sunday morning when we're all gathered. I preach, I give a message from my office. We have some music, we try to point people to Jesus on Sunday mornings. Well, we can't meet together here. I mean, is that wrong?
No, I think that's good. We do that too. I think we do what we can. So if I could just back up a little bit, because maybe I was confusing.
Yeah.
Certainly we don't mean the church is the building. It's not the building. It's the congregation who meet together regularly. And so certainly we could meet in our house. Right. We could meet in our backyard, whatever. We could all meet there, and we could have church there. But what we're saying, I guess, is the church is the congregation, is the people of God, the membership. That's the church. And you can't really be a church if you're not gathering together, because that's the word assembly. Ecclesia come within that, like we said, is the word assembly. So gathering together. So now Now, we can't do that right now, but what you're saying is, can we still worship? Can we still point to Christ? Absolutely. We every day, our family, we try to have family worship every day, in which we sing a song. Mm-hmm. We have hymn books. We each have hymn books, sing songs. We read scripture. We pray. We catechize our children, Christian doctrine. We do that every day, and we call that family worship. It's worship. And so if we couldn't meet together on Sunday at all, that's what we do, and that's a good thing, and God's pleased with that, and that's worship. But we just want to separate our categories biblically. That would not fulfill the biblical requirement of church. And so, like what you're doing online and what we're doing online, that is worship. It's pointing to Christ. It's good. It's profitable. It's helpful to people. And yet that does not fully fulfill the biblical requirement of what we would call the church.
Yeah. I guess I just want to make sure that we're not saying inadvertently here, because the church can't gather, that
right.
We should just be throwing everything else out the window. That's not what we're saying. We still have a responsibility in our homes to worship, like you were saying. I think we still have a responsibility as the church to lead and point people to worship, and to do everything we can on those grounds. But what this time really should be doing is creating a longing in us to come together and gather together as the church community. I think what that meme does really is inadvertently saying, well, wait a minute, why do we even need to go to church then? Why do we even need to, if God opened a church in every home, then when the pandemic's over, just continue to do the same thing and fulfill, like your language, fulfill the biblical requirement of church. But my bathrobe in the living room, which
that's dangerous.
That's not,
and that's what our concern is.
Scripture talks about the church,
and that is our concern. There's a danger if we do not talk biblically now as we're going through this. We're going to have all kinds of problems on the backside of this. And Joe's going to prefer to do church online in his jammies, and there are churches that are doing the ordinances online, baptizing online. I saw where a church in it was like Georgia or Tennessee baptized somebody in Florida online. The online communion thing, grab your cookies and milk and at home, and hey, let's have communion. And so that this is our concern too. Is that's kind of scary, right? When you say that this is church and this is communion or this is baptism, and you're not following the scripture on it, right? That's concerning to us too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Right.
What's wrong with that, Colt? Like having communion and getting your Oreos and your milk, and isn't that pointing to Jesus? I mean, you can talk about Jesus while you do it, and isn't that good enough?
Right.
What do you think?
Well, I'm just looking at 1 Corinthians 11 here. But in the following instructions, I do not commend you, because when you come together, it is not for the better, but for the worse. He's just kind of taken for over and over. Then in verse 18, for in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you, and I believe in part, for there must be factions among you, in order for those who are genuine among you to be recognized. When you come together, over and over and over, he's saying in this discussion of the Lord's Supper, when you come together, you're doing it wrong. When you come together, you need to be doing, this is what you need to do. And this is part of the gathering of the church community. I mean, this is communion in the church, and it's showing and displaying unity. And it's the church coming together in agreement on what the Lord has done for them. And we've made all sorts of things in the church very individualistic. Corporate worship, for another example, has just become all about the individual. And I think for a while you saw a lot of the songs that were kind of touted, as corporate worship songs being about the individual. I'm in a crowd, but it's just me and Jesus, and that's really not, corporate worship is we're singing this together. Yes, I can sing songs anywhere I can sing songs and worship anywhere when I'm driving down the road or whatever the case is. But in corporate worship, we're singing together. And yes, we can always remember what Christ has done for us. We should remember the gospel all the time. It should be in the forefront of our mind. We don't need a cracker and wine to remember what Christ has done for us. But there's a certain time in the life of the church in which we come together as a church, as a community, a body of believers, and we focus our attention on what Christ has done for us and showing our unity in allegiance to the gospel in that.
Yeah, that's really good.
Lord's Supper, in my mind, doesn't take place outside of the gathering of the church.
And in that chapter, he contrasts that with what you do at home, what you do in your own homes. So, and then also he says, wait for one another when you come together. Like you say, it's an assembly thing. It's a church thing. It's only when we come together as a church that we can do that. So I agree. And I think that we end up doing the very thing that he warns against, taking the supper in an unworthy manner. This is the dangerous thing when we don't do it as prescribed. And I think that is the concern, is we could be leading a congregation and doing something in an unworthy manner.
Right. Yeah. And I think this is just one of those, another example of one of the things that you and I are worried about here in coming through this pandemic and being, not being able to meet here for a time. And what we're thinking about church is, no, we can't just do everything that we do in church, and we can't do it in the privacy of our own homes and have it be the church. There's things that need to happen in the life of the church. And I know there's good churches that, well-meaning churches there's a lot around here that have done communion in one way or another. And I don't want this discussion meant to be like we're trying to come down on them. This is a concern that we have, in that during this time we need to really be thinking about that question: what is the church, and how does the church function? What is communion? What does the Lord's Supper mean? What does baptism mean? Is it just something we do? Can we do it online in some way or not? I think they're questions that need to be wrestled with, and that's what you and I are trying to do. We're trying to think through these things ourselves, and hopefully get some other people to think through them as well.
Yeah, and we're trying to practice discernment, which is a biblical requirement. In Hebrews chapter 5, it says, "For everyone who lives on milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, since he is a child. But solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil." So all we're trying to do is grow in maturity and reflect and contemplate what's going on, what's right, what's wrong. That's all we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And sharpen our own understanding of the church and how to practice.
Right. And I think that for us, coming out of this, and especially for me, is this question, and we've been really wrestling with this in the last few years anyway, is what does it mean to be the church? What does it mean to be a member of the church? And some of those things have come up in different ways. And this is just one more way I think we're wrestling with what is the church? And it's a good question. And I think that coming out of this, hopefully people just have a tremendous longing for, to come together and to be, to come together as the church, not just to see people that they haven't seen in however many weeks here, but just a longing to come together, to worship corporately, to take part in to come to the Lord's table, together as community. Hopefully those things take a little bit of hopefully the meaning of those things is a little bit more enriched from this experience that we're in now. That's what I'm praying for anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good thought.
So let's switch gears just a little bit here. One of the things that we've seen in this COVID-19 pandemic deal relating to the church is questions about when the church should not meet. Should we keep meeting? I think I was talking to a brother today, and he was saying, in their church, we just having this discussion, where does the fear of man and the fear of God, where do they come together? Is not meeting for a time, is that saying that we're fearing this, that we're paralyzed by fear, I guess. And I think those are good questions that we have to wrestle with, when the government says, limit your meeting size, when do we disobey that? What criteria do we use? Certainly there's a public health crisis. You want to love your neighbor. You don't want to spread germs and contribute to the problem either. There's a little bit of a balance game that's taking place. I've had a few different meetings with different pastors and stuff here in the last couple of weeks, and this issue of reopening has come up, and we don't know. As far as how exactly does this look? So I guess the first question is when can a church disobey the government on this issue, and when should we just obey? Do you have any thoughts there, John?
Well, first of all, there are different spheres. The church has its own sphere, and Jesus is Lord of the church. And then there's the sphere of government, and that's another sphere. And so for us to corporately meet every week is under the reign of Jesus Christ. He's the Lord. He tells us to do that. Now we have a problem here because the government is another sphere, and they're telling us we can't meet. Okay. But that's a legitimate thing. If the government has a legitimate concern because they have been given part of their domain, part of their realm is to preserve life in their country. And so if they have a legitimate request to preserve life, then the church should yield to that. They should have the same concern for their own people and the same concern for their own community. So if it's a valid concern, the church should willingly submit to the government. The problem comes, and I think, is in many people's minds today, is in some situations, the government is allowing, liquor stores and pot dispensaries and box stores to be open, but they're saying the church can't meet. And so a lot of brothers and sisters are wrestling with this idea of, can we continue to submit to a government who thinks it's okay to go to a box store with 250 people in it as long as they practice social distancing, and yet our church of a less amount can't come together and practice social distancing. So those are hard decisions. But I think that first of all, we should realize that is the rightful realm of the government to preserve life. And so if they have a reasonable request, I think we should honor that. But I think that the moment it isn't reasonable, or it's not fair, it's not equitable, I think we should start to examine and start to question and start to pray and if we sense that we're being picked on or treated unfairly, I think that changes the scenario. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think that our governor in South Dakota here has been pretty clear that she wasn't going to mandate that churches close. I mean, of course, there was some guidelines on public gatherings and things like that. But I think the hand of the government, when you start saying churches need to close, I think that needs to be left in the discernment of the people and the leadership. And I think the trouble is where these other state governments and leaders are trying to reach into all these different spheres, and I would hope that they're not trying to just pick on churches, but it certainly is coming across that way, and in some places, and I think there's places where churches now are having to make some decisions on whether they're going to disobey the city ordinance or the state stay-at-home order or whatever it is, and meet. And those are hard decisions for churches and leaders to make on both sides. There's certainly if the government leader is trying to pick on churches, that's not right. But if there's a public health emergency and they're asking everybody to stay at home for a time, then I think the church leaders and pastors need to seriously think through that, and do what's best. I think the love for your neighbor is a really good question on both sides. We gotta, as people in the church, as pastors and leaders, we got to think about all of our people, and we want to love them the best we can. And sometimes loving them means not seeing them for a while, in this situation, I think there's but it's a hard situation on both sides. But I think that the pastors and leaders need to weigh these things. But yes, there is a time that the church needs to stand up and disobey the leaders when they're not right. When they're
and those are
that come in conflict with. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, those are really good thoughts. I would just throw a couple more things out there. The church historically, if we're just talking about fear, the church historically has often had to meet under persecution, threat, and danger at some risk. And, that it's like anything. It's like you go walk out of your house today, there's risk. Just getting in your car and driving for me to go to Walmart 20 miles away is a risk. So, those things just need to be weighed carefully. What concerns me is that there's going to be disagreements on elder boards and in churches, and I think there needs to be a lot of grace in this. And I think that, if there's 5 elders and 3 are one way and 2 the other, I think the 2 need to willingly submit. And this isn't a salvation issue. This isn't a heretical issue to disagree on. I think I think people can submit here to our brothers and sisters, our brothers, the elders in that respect, and congregations as well, brothers and sisters. I think there's going to be disagreement in congregations and elder boards on this, and I think we need to give freedom and grace to each other when we differ.
Yeah. And I think that kind of takes this part of the conversation and goes back to what we just talked about is coming together, being the church and the Lord's Supper and unity. what are we united around? It's the essentials of the gospel. It's, we're all these different people, come from different backgrounds, different, we all have different stories, but yet there's a tremendous unity when it comes to the Lord's table. But yes, we can differ on a whole lot of other things. And, some people are going to come to church and they might wear a mask, and some people won't. And it all depends on, too, what's specifically going on in the life of your community and in your church. For instance, our county hasn't seen a case of COVID-19 in several weeks now. We were the hot spot in the state, kind of scary. It was, we had 2 deaths in our county. Both of them are buried in our cemetery. One of them was a young mother that died suddenly of this, shocked everybody. It really tore our church up for a while, and it was tough to grieve when we couldn't, come together and do it normally. And, it just made a complex and difficult situation even more complex and more difficult. And, certainly churches and communities that face those kind of things, they're gonna handle these things and weigh these things a little bit different. And like you said, we need to come at these things with just tremendous grace and love for our brothers and sisters, because, this isn't a salvation issue, and how long, this is going to last. And, yes, we need to get back to some kind of normal. We need to get back to worship, and we need to do those things. And we will. We just need to do it in a loving and right way. And those decisions are hard, I think. I think every elder board is, dealing with those things. I've talked to a couple pastors and leaders in our community, and, they're all, struggling, in one way or another. I heard one guy say that, we want to come back together, but, the tape, are we really going to come together and tape off rows and limit the number of people in our sanctuary, and then clean between services, and, tell people that the first time we gather, you can't be within 6 feet of another person. And, these restrictions that are kind of there, yes, you can gather, but, you want to do it right too. And then it just adds a whole new dimension in the life of the church. Is that something we want to, those are hard things to weigh.
Those are, for Nebraska, we're in Nebraska, and we have been under a restriction. We couldn't meet over 10 people. And just Monday, May 4th, our governor allowed our county, most counties in Nebraska, to start meeting again under social distance guidelines, 6 feet. You can't pass things out in the church. So for me, it's a different situation because, well, first of all, Perkins County, we haven't had a case at all of COVID. We don't even, in our county, we don't have any cases. And secondly, things to weigh in. For me is, the second commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself, right? But the first commandment, the one before that, is to love the Lord your God. And so that has to come into play as well. And what does God want us to do? And I think sometimes we, at least from my perspective, in my situation, God calls us to come together, and unless I have a justifiable good reason, then I need to let the Lord lead in that. And so in that sense, I think it's just a no-brainer that now that we can meet and we can comply with 6 feet distance, we have a small congregation on a large building, we can easily do that. it's not like it's like it's a no-brainer decision. Yeah, we're going to do what the Lord wants us to do. And also, and you think about another hard thing is, well, do we tell people who are elderly to stay home? What do we do? And in that sense, it's hard to, who am I to say who can come to the worship service that Christ commands us to do and who can't, right? So I think that we leave it up to the people to make those calls. I don't know. That's how I'm working through it.
Yeah. 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 And I think that we're all kind of working through this all a little bit different. We're kind of, but I think one thing that needs to be clear is that we're all going back to the Word of God. We're all asking those questions. What is the church? What does the Lord want of us? And am I submitting to this? Is it and I don't know. I just really pray that the Lord finds us faithful coming through these things, and the discussions that we're having on our elder boards are good discussions, and we're thinking through things the right way,
and I think it's natural that
we want to love our people well.
Yeah, and I think it's naturally with your experience with it, within your community and my community, they're completely different perspectives, and it's going to lead us to probably different conclusions at times.
Yeah. 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 And so we're going to meet tonight and talk about some of these things a little bit. And, it'll be interesting kind of where we're at on some of that stuff. But I'm not sure I talked to some of the pastors around, and I'm not sure, they just kind of, the guys I talked to said they were kind of taking it week by week here. So that's kind of been what we're doing. But well, what did we miss, John? Did we miss something there? Or we got it all, kind of covered it all? We've been
I think
talking for a while here.
I think we've probably covered the bases.
I think we sign off. Yeah. Well, I know my audio was a little bit garbly on some of that, so I hope it came across all right and people can figure that out. But it was fun visiting with you, and just want to say that if people have questions, comments for us, if there's some things they'd like us to talk about, hit us up, send us a message, whatever. We'd love to kind of talk about what different people want us to talk about. So thanks for tuning in to Renewal Cast today, and we'll be back sometime in the near future here.